Hey friends, welcome to the channel. Though I personally do not prefer using PowerPoint slides for presenting something, as I believe that there can be much more interesting ways to present an information or a product. However, it has been one of the most requested topics of this channel, and so here are my 2 cents about different tips and tricks of presentation. My name is Refat. I'm a lecturer based in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and on this channel, I talk about study, law, and productivity. At first, let's look at a nifty little trick. Often during presentation, we need to distract the audience from the slides and keep the focus on the presenter itself. So in that case, just using the period button or the full stop button can make your screen entirely go black, and just pressing it again can turn it back on. This is a trick that might be handy for you in different situations where the focus should be on something else than the presentation or the slide. Moving on, another nifty little trick is the ability to jump to any slides. For example, if I just move back to the previous slide and the previous slide and the previous slide, that becomes boring, that makes our work hard, and in that case, we need to switch back and forth again and again. But if I want to, for example, just go to the first slide, I can simply press 1 and enter, and it will take me to the first slide. Say, for example, the fourth slide that we were at right now, I can just press 4 and enter, and it will take me back to the slide I was at. So that's one other major trick, that if you know the slide number, in that case, you can very easily use it to your advantage. Moving on, before beginning any slide in PowerPoint presentation, it's always a good idea to create an outline first, because that might give the audience an idea about what this presentation is about and what is coming up next. So it will help you structure the presentation itself too. So let's look at one example. For example, I'll be talking about these 9 tips in this video or in this presentation, and that's why having a proper list of what's coming up next in this presentation is a good idea. For example, it's now clear to you that throughout this video what are the things I'm going to talk about. Same thing happens with the timestamps that you will find in the video description here, which will help you to jump back and forth to different topics and move your focus to the right place where you need it to be. Moving on, about the slide structure, the slide you're looking at right now is a good example. Why? Because it will take 1 or 2 minutes of me explaining this slide, and the points that I'm trying to make is in bullet form rather than in complete sentences, and the slide is not containing more than 4 or 5 points, which is a good number to have on one single slide. And I did not use any complex words, rather I used some keywords and phrases to make you understand that what could be a good slide structure. On the other hand, this is a bad slide structure. Why? Because this contains a paragraph with too much text, and if the audience starts to read this paragraph, they will be distracted from your speech, and if they are listening to your speech, they are not actually looking at the slide or learning anything new from it. So because of this unwanted distraction that is created by too much text in one single paragraph in a slide, this is a bad example of a slide structure, so it's better to avoid this kind of slides in your presentation. Moving on, this is rather a good slide structure because I can show you one point at a time. So both my focus and the focus of the audience is on that particular one point only. And also it will help both me and the audience to concentrate on that particular point because we are not getting distracted by something else. Moreover, it will also prevent the audience from reading ahead about what's on the slide, because this may remove the element of surprise that you may have for the audience because the audience have already read ahead. So showing one point at a time in that sense is a really good idea. And it will also help keep your presentation focused because you are only specifically focusing on one point at a time when you are talking about that point. Moving on to fonts, it's always a good idea to maintain the fonts of your headings or fonts of the body of the slide throughout your entire presentation. And you have to also make sure that your font is not too big or not too small, and not a mixture of different types of fonts. You should always use standard fonts which are clear to eyes, understandable by everyone. For example, this is a bad example of fonts. Why? Because on the first point, the fonts are too small for the audience. So it will be irrelevant and unnecessary because the audience will not be able to read what you have written. On the second point, it's also very annoying because every word is capitalized here. So you should not capitalize a word unless that is absolutely necessary, because if you do that, in that case you are not highlighting everything. So there goes the saying that if you highlight everything, you highlight nothing. And similarly, also looking at the third point here, you should not use a complicated font that is not visibility friendly or reader friendly to the reader. So it's a good idea not to use too small or too big fonts, not to capitalize everything you are saying, and not to use complicated font that is not reader friendly. Moving on, colors are also important and that can bring life to your presentation. However, you should make sure that the colors are contrasting. The color of the background and the color of the fonts that you are using on that background should contrast sharply with each other. Moreover, you can also diversify the color of the fonts. For example, you can use one color for the headings and another color for the body text. But in this case, the less color you are using, the more classy looking or classic looking that is. And you should also remember to use the same color structure or color palette throughout your presentation. That means you're using one color for one particular slide. Do not change that color suddenly for the next slide. However, within the slide, you can occasionally use some contrasting colors to highlight different texts. The importance of using good colors is visible in this next slide, because you can see the first color, the font color is yellow here, and that is not a good contrast with this particular background, so it is barely visible. And in other points, different colors are used for different points, sometimes for different words, and sometimes even for different letters. That is only distracting, that is not soothing to the eye. So it's always better to use less colors, but sometimes colors can also be helpful to highlight the point you are making. You need to be also careful about what kind of background you are using. For example, I am using a light background here and I'm using dark contrasting font for my writing, so the writing is clearly visible. On the other hand, in this slide, this is a very bad example of a slide because the colors and the fonts are not contrasted. There are too many colors, too many distractions, so it is not helpful at all. So we need to try to avoid this kind of colors which are not contrasting in our presentation. Moving on, using visuals or using graphs is a much better idea than using write-ups in your slides. So a slide is for assisting what you are saying. It is not for distracting people away from you. It is so that people can focus more on you. So using good titles and using good diagrams, charts, and other visual elements to explain what you are trying to say is much better than putting it in writing. But at the same time, we need to be careful about what kind of visuals we are using in our slides. For example, this graph, even though it is small and does not contain that much information, it is not very user-friendly because it is hard just by looking at it to understand what's going on. Instead, if we use a bar chart here, that's very easy for an eye to understand that something better happened for the sales of blue balls in March compared to other months, or that in particularly March, the sale of blue balls exceeded red balls largely. So you can get the overall idea from this kind of graphs. But at the same time, while using graphs, you need to be careful about what kind of design you are using for that graph. For example, this is a bad example because even though this gives you the same information, the use of different lines, shadings and colors makes it distracting, and it's not very helpful to give away the message that you are trying to give. So it should be really clear to you right now that what kind of graphs or visual is really useful for your presentation and what kind of graphs or visuals is not that much useful. Moving on, you should really recheck again and again your slides for spelling and grammar mistakes, because it is often not professional looking or smart enough to have those kind of mistakes in your slide. For example, spelling mistake or accidental use of repeated words or any grammatical errors that you are making. So it's always better to reread or revise your slides, and it's an even better idea to ask someone else to check your presentation. At the end of your presentation, you should always try to make a strong and effective closing, because more often than not, audiences are likely to remember what you have said last most. So you should definitely say something crucial or important or something that initiates thoughts in your audience in your conclusion. So your conclusion should not only summarize your entire presentation, because that is your golden opportunity to introduce to the audience something that they may have missed during your presentation. And you should also suggest some thought-provoking questions at the end of your presentation, because that will make the audience think about your presentation again and again, and that creates value for the information and the topics you delivered during your presentation. And at the end of the presentation, rather than ending the presentation abruptly, it's always better to be friendly and inviting to the audience. So even if you are doing a question and answer session, it's a good idea to have something visually appealing in front of the crowd to make them question you or make them involved or engaged in your presentation. So besides saying thank you, you should leave them information about how they can further contact with you or which question they can ponder about for that presentation. I hope this video will help you be a better presenter, and there are many more tips that one can use to improve their presentation game. So if you also have any tips regarding how to be a better presenter or any other presentation tips and tricks, you can comment down below, and that would be very helpful for everyone. Don't forget to like this video if this video helped you, and it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel, because that will help this channel to grow. I have also made this playlist for you which might be interesting to you, so please check it out. Thanks for watching and see you later.